The sergeant's world collapsed. His face, moments before red with rage, instantly paled, turning ashen white like wax. Eyes wide, he stammered, unable to form a single word. Before his stunned team, the judge, her badge still in hand, continued. "You are under arrest, caught in the act for abuse of authority, assault, and attempted forgery of a public document. Call Internal Affairs and prepare for the consequences. Your power, Sergeant, has just met the law." The humiliation was public, complete, and irreversible. The air on the road, previously thick with dust and arrogance, now weighed heavy with stunned silence. The sergeant, once a colossus of forged authority, shrank under the judge's icy gaze. His face, which moments earlier had flaunted the redness of rage and the puffiness of power, drained of color, transforming into a pale, waxy mask. The golden badge, a small rectangle of metal and law, seemed to radiate a blinding light, revealing the fragility of his own uniform. He stammered, but no sound escaped his dry throat. The world, which he believed he controlled with a slap and a ticket book, had just crumbled around him brick by brick. The officers, his subordinates, were paralyzed. Their eyes darted between the sergeant, now a pathetic figure, and the woman who, in seconds, had overturned the hierarchy of that roadside. Corporal Silva, the most senior after the sergeant, felt a chill run down his spine. He knew his chief's temper, the way he liked to flaunt power, especially with the most vulnerable. But never, in his years of service, had he imagined such a brutal, definitive reversal. The sergeant's humiliation was their humiliation too, a cruel reminder of the thin line between authority and abuse. The judge, for her part, showed neither haste nor triumph. Her voice, previously calm, now carried the undeniable weight of the law. She tucked her badge into the inner pocket of her blazer, a gesture that seemed to seal the sergeant's fate. "Corporal," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. "Contact Internal Affairs, report what happened, and request a team to take this individual into custody. He is under my legal custody." Corporal Silva instinctively reached for his radio, but hesitated. He looked at the sergeant, who seemed to have aged 10 years in a minute, his eyes wide with terror. The sergeant finally managed to stammer something, a hoarse, desperate sound. "Judge, please, I didn't know." The judge ignored him completely, her eyes fixed on Corporal Silva with an intensity that brooked no argument. "Corporal, that is an order. Omission will be considered complicity." The veiled threat was clear. This was not a request, it was a judicial determination. Corporal Silva swallowed hard. Loyalty to the sergeant, however questionable, could not override obedience to the law, especially when the law itself was embodied in that woman. He picked up the radio, his hands slightly trembling, and began to transmit the message. His voice choked by the gravity of the situation. As Corporal Silva spoke into the radio, the other officers began to move, slowly, as if emerging from a trance. One of them, Private Mendez, a rookie, felt his stomach churn. He had witnessed the assault, the dry slap across the woman's face, the sergeant's arrogance as he tore up her document. At that moment, he had felt discomfort. But the fear of contradicting a superior had silenced him. Now, justice was being served in a way he never imagined. The lesson was brutal, but unforgettable. The sergeant, seeing his own man contact Internal Affairs, felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Images of that day tumbled through his mind. The simple car, the woman who seemed so defenseless, the desire to show who was in charge. The slap, the dry sound of palm against skin. He had seen himself as a predator, a lion in his territory, and now he was the prey, cornered, powerless. His career, built over years of service, some honorable, others less so, was crumbling. His family, his reputation, everything was at stake. That slap had not just been an act of violence, it had been a fatal blow to his own life. The judge observed the scene with calculated calm. She felt no satisfaction, only the cold resolve of one fulfilling her duty. This man, with his uniform and badge, had dishonored the institution he swore to protect. He had used his power to oppress, to humiliate, and now he would face the consequences. Internal Affairs, the police's internal control unit, was known for its implacability. He would have no privileges. He would be treated like any other criminal, perhaps even worse, for betraying public trust. Minutes dragged on, feeling like hours. The distant sound of sirens began to approach, breaking the oppressive silence of the road. These were not patrol sirens, but those of Internal Affairs, with their deeper, more official tone, announcing the arrival of relentless justice. The sergeant felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at the judge, his eyes pleading, but she merely stared back with an unyielding expression. Her power, silent and legal, was infinitely greater than any brute force he could display. His world, indeed, had fallen, and he was about to be buried under the rubble. The wail of sirens grew, a mournful chant tearing through the heavy silence of the road. It wasn't the familiar sound of patrol cars, but a deeper, more official tone, announcing the arrival of an authority that tolerated no deviations. Two discreet black vehicles, with the Internal Affairs emblem almost invisible on their doors, appeared on the horizon. Their blue and red strobes pulsed in the warm air, and relentless rhythm. They stopped abruptly behind the sergeant's patrol car, sealing his fate, blocking any escape, any shred of hope. From inside the cars emerged 3 men and a woman, all in impeccable uniforms, their faces serious, almost impassive. The leader, a middle-aged major with the rigid posture of a veteran, approached the judge directly, completely ignoring the sergeant. His eyes, however, swept the scene, registering every detail: the stopped patrol car, the stunned officers, the torn ticket book on the ground, and the sergeant, now a trembling figure, his eyes wide with terror. "Judge," the Internal Affairs officer said, his voice grave but respectful, "I am Major Almeida. We received the call. What is the situation?" The judge, with the same calm she had maintained from the start, pointed to the sergeant. Her voice, though low, carried the undeniable weight of the law. "Major, this individual, sergeant, is under arrest, caught in the act, for abuse of authority, physical assault, and attempted forgery of a public document. I am the victim and the witness." She extended her hand, showing the torn document. Now, irrefutable proof. "He tore up my driver's license and slapped me across the face, all because I questioned a forged ticket." Major Almeida nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the sergeant. The sergeant's expression was one of absolute despair. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his dry throat. "Major, I swear, I didn't know." The major raised his hand, silencing him with a firm gesture. "Sergeant, you will have an opportunity to speak, but for now you are in Internal Affairs custody." He turned to his men. "Handcuff him and collect all evidence at the scene. The ticket book, the torn document, everything." The officers from the sergeant's team watched everything in sepulchral silence. Corporal Silva, who had made the call, felt a mix of relief and guilt. Relief for not having become an accomplice, guilt for having allowed the situation to reach this point. Private Mendez, the youngest, could barely breathe. The image of the sergeant, once so imposing, now handcuffed like a common criminal, would be etched into his memory forever. It was a brutal lesson about power and its consequences. The Internal Affairs agents acted with cold efficiency. One of them approached the sergeant, who resisted for a brief moment, a last spasm of his lost authority, but the agent's strength and determination were undeniable. The cold metal handcuffs clamped onto his wrists, a dry sound that echoed in the silence, sealing his fate. The sergeant, once a predator, was now the prey, stripped of his authority, of his dignity. While one of the agents photographed the scene and collected evidence, Another began to fill out an arrest report. Major Almeida, meanwhile, spoke in a low voice with the judge, noting the details of her initial statement. She explained the facts clearly, without emotion, focusing only on the legal aspects of the assault and abuse. "We will need your formal statement at Internal Affairs Headquarters, Judge," the major said, "and a physical examination if there are marks from the assault." The judge nodded. "I understand. I am at your disposal. As for the examination, the slap was hard, but I don't believe it left visible marks. The humiliation and abuse of power, however, are undeniable." The sergeant was escorted to one of the Internal Affairs vehicles. His eyes, once full of rage and arrogance, were now tear-filled, fixed on his former subordinates as if seeking a last shred of loyalty or pity. But there was nothing, only averted gazes, pale faces. That slap had not only sealed his fate, but had also completely isolated him. The door of the Internal Affairs car closed with a dull thud, sealing the sergeant's fate. The vehicles, their sirens now silent, departed quietly, carrying away the man who, minutes before, had been the king of that stretch of road. The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer the stunned silence of shock, but a heavy silence of reflection and of a justice that, though delayed, had manifested itself unquestionably. The judge watched the cars drive away until they disappeared on the horizon. She felt a deep weariness, but also a strange sense of duty fulfilled. There was no triumph in her gaze, only the certainty that the law, at times, needed to be defended with firmness and courage. She turned to Corporal Silva and Private Mendez, who were still standing, motionless. "Corporal," she said, her voice softer now, but still carrying authority, "you may continue your patrol, but remember what happened here today. The badge is a symbol of service, not arbitrary power. The law is for everyone, and no one is above it." She approached her own car, the torn document still in her hand. She picked up her cell phone and called her office. "I need you to prepare a detailed report for the Public Prosecutor's Office and for Internal Affairs, and schedule a meeting for me with the police chief. We have much to discuss about the training and conduct of some officers." As she spoke, Corporal Silva and Private Mendez exchanged glances. The lesson of that day would not be forgotten. The sergeant had fallen, and with him the illusion of impunity. The judge, in her simplicity and firmness, had restored faith in justice, even if in such a dramatic and unexpected way. She got into her car, the engine started, and she drove away, leaving behind a road that would never be the same, and a team of officers who had just witnessed the harshest and most necessary of lessons. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, as if the day and the sergeant were coming to an end. The distant rumble of the judge's engine faded into the air, taking with it the last trace of the tension that had paralyzed the road. But the silence that followed was not of peace, but of a deafening void, filled only by the echo of the sirens that had receded and the indelible image of a handcuffed sergeant. Corporal Silva and Private Mendez remained there, static, under the twilight that now stained the sky blood-red, like an open wound on the horizon. For Corporal Silva, the scene replayed in his mind. The slap, the golden badge, the judge's unwavering voice. He had done the right thing, called Internal Affairs, but the feeling of relief was mixed with a bitter taste of betrayal and failure. Betrayal not to the law, but to the camaraderie of the uniform, however distorted it might be. Failure for having allowed a superior to reach such a point of madness. That badge, which he had worn with pride for years, now felt heavy, stained by a shadow that was not his. But that affected him directly. He looked at the torn ticket book on the ground, a harmless piece of paper that had unleashed a storm. This was not an isolated incident. It was the tip of the iceberg of a culture that, at times, forgot whom it served. Private Mendes, the youngest on the team, felt his stomach churn. His training, still fresh in his memory, spoke of honor, duty, and protection. But what he had witnessed was the antithesis of all that. The sergeant, once a model of authority, was now a symbol of abuse. The lesson was brutal but unforgettable. The fear of contradicting a superior, which had silenced him for moments, was now replaced by a cold certainty. The law was greater than any hierarchy. He wondered how many other sergeants existed, hidden beneath the uniform, and how many corporals and privates remained silent out of fear. The image of the sergeant, with his pale face and tear-filled eyes, would be a ghost in his future patrols. A constant reminder that power, when not exercised responsibly, turned against its wielder. Meanwhile, the judge drove towards the city, weariness weighing on her shoulders, but her mind sharp and focused. The call to her office had been just the first step. She knew that the sergeant's case would not end with his arrest. It was only the beginning of a long and painful process, not only for him, but for the institution he had dishonored. That slap had not just been an assault on her, but a slap in the face of justice, a direct challenge to the authority she represented. And she would not allow it to go unpunished. Her mind was already charting the next steps, the detailed report for the public prosecutor's office, the formal communication to Internal Affairs, the meeting with the chief of police. It would not be an easy conversation. She knew there would be resistance, attempts to minimize what happened, to protect the corporation's image. But she was prepared. Her career had taught her that justice often required an arduous fight against inertia and complacency. She sought not revenge, but the restoration of order, the reaffirmation that no one was above the law, especially those who swore to protect it. Far away, in the growing darkness of the night, the sergeant was being taken to Internal Affairs headquarters. The interior of the patrol car was cramped, the smell of old upholstery and cold metal suffocating. The handcuffs on his wrists seemed to tighten not only his flesh, but his soul. Each jolt of the car was a reminder of his fall, of his impotence. The world he knew, built on arrogance and control, crumbled with every meter traveled. He tried to rationalize, to blame the judge, the situation, anyone but himself. But the image of the slap, the dry sound, her unwavering expression, everything repeated in an infernal loop in his mind. He thought of his family, his wife, his children. How would he explain this? The shame would be unbearable. His reputation, built over years of service, was now in tatters, exposed to public execration. Internal Affairs did not forgive. He knew that. He had seen others fall, but always thought he was different, untouchable. The irony was cruel. He, who always saw himself as the hunter, was now the prey, cornered, with no escape. Fear, a feeling he rarely admitted, now consumed him. A chill that did not come from the air conditioning, but from the abyss opening beneath his feet. The patrol car stopped. The door opened, revealing the austere facade of the Internal Affairs building, illuminated by cold lights. It was a place of accountability, of internal judgment. He was led inside, each step a dragging of invisible chains. The silence there was different from that on the road. It was a heavy silence of bureaucracy, of interrogations, of sealed fates. His uniform, once a symbol of power, now seemed like a prisoner's uniform. The night was just beginning, and with it, the long and tortuous path of his penitence. The judge had left, but the justice she had invoked was only beginning to manifest in its implacable fullness. The heavy metal door of Internal Affairs closed behind the sergeant with a sound that echoed like a hammer striking a gong, sealing not only his entry, but the end of an era. The air inside was dense, heavy with the smell of old paper, disinfectant, and an unmistakable aura of accountability. There was none of the arrogance of the streets, nor the forced respect of subordinates. Here, He was just another number, a problem to be solved, a name to be tarnished in the records. Led through cold corridors illuminated by merciless fluorescent lights, the sergeant felt the weight of the handcuffs not only on his wrists, but in every fiber of his being. His uniform, once a shield of authority, now seemed like a uniform of shame. With each step, the images of the day repeated: the judge's smile, the slap, the golden badge, the gazes of his own men. Every detail, a stab at his dignity. He tried to hold his head high, but the force that propelled him was that of a defeated man. He was taken to an interrogation room, a sterile white cube with a metal table and 2 chairs. Major Almeida, who had accompanied him, sat opposite him, his face impassive. There was no anger, no triumph, just a cold professionalism that was, in a way, even more frightening. A clerk was already in position, with a recorder and a notepad. The silence was deafening, broken only by the click of the recorder being turned on. "Sergeant," the major began, his voice calm but imbued with unquestionable authority, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. Do you wish to contact one now?" The sergeant swallowed hard. His mind was a whirlwind. Attorney? He hadn't thought of that. Reality hit him with the force of a punch. "No, not now," he mumbled, his voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable. The truth was, he didn't know what to do, didn't know where to begin, unraveling the knot his life had become. Major Almeida merely nodded, without a change in expression. The questions began. Methodical, surgical, each one a scalpel dissecting the events of that afternoon. The sergeant tried to defend himself at first with half-truths and omissions, but the judge's narrative, already in Internal Affairs possession, was detailed and irrefutable. With each contradiction, the major merely looked at him, the coldness of his gaze stripping bare the fragility of his lies. Sweat trickled down the sergeant's forehead. The air in the room seemed thin. He knew he was digging his own grave. Meanwhile, the judge, far from the corridors of Internal Affairs, drove towards the city center. Weariness still weighed on her, but the adrenaline of the situation kept her alert. The sun had completely set, and the city lights were beginning to illuminate, painting a scene of normalcy that contrasted sharply with the turmoil she had left behind. Her mind, however, was already in combat mode. The initial call to her office had been just a warning. Now she needed to act with surgical precision. Upon arriving at her apartment, she barely took time for a quick shower. She dressed in more formal attire and called her assistant, Anna, asking her to fast-track some documents. "Anna, I need all precedents regarding abuse of authority and assault by law enforcement officers. I also want a detailed report on the disciplinary history of the sergeant in question, and please contact the public prosecutor's office. I want a prosecutor assigned to oversee this case closely. It's not just a matter of assault, it's a matter of trust in the institution." Her voice was firm, every word charged with purpose. She knew the battle would be long. There was a culture of corporatism to be confronted, the inertia of a system that, at times, preferred to sweep dirt under the rug. But she was ready. It wasn't a personal matter, though the slap still stung in her memory. It was a matter of principle, of defending the law she had sworn to protect. The judge visualized the chessboard before her, anticipating every move, every counterattack. She knew the corporation's image would be defended at all costs, but the truth for her was non-negotiable. Back on the deserted road, Corporal Silva and Private Mendez tried to resume their routine, but normalcy had been shattered. The silence inside the patrol car was heavy, filled with the images of the sergeant, handcuffed, and the judge, imposing. Private Mendez, still in shock, watched the corporal. "Corporal, what's going to happen now?" The private's voice was low, almost a whisper. Corporal Silva sighed. His eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his mind elsewhere. What has to happen, Private? The sergeant will answer for his actions. Internal affairs doesn't mess around. He paused, adjusting his cap. But the lesson isn't just for him. It's for us too. For all of us. Private Mendez nodded slowly. I never thought I'd see something like this. He was the sergeant. Now he's a defendant, the corporal completed, his voice choked by a mix of sadness and resignation. The badge doesn't give you the right to walk all over people, Private. It gives you the duty to protect them. And today, the sergeant forgot that. He forgot who he was and who he should be. That day had changed everything for them. The fear of contradicting a superior, which once seemed an unbreakable rule, was now seen in a new light. Authority without responsibility was merely tyranny. The image of the judge, a simple woman in her car, taking down a man who considered himself untouchable, would be a beacon in their future decisions. They knew they would have to testify, that the story would spread through the corporation like wildfire. But, for the first time, the fear of reprisals seemed smaller than the certainty that they had witnessed justice manifest itself implacably. The night advanced, and with it, the gears of justice turned. At Internal Affairs, the sergeant began to feel the weight of his choices, each question from Major Almeida a nail in his professional coffin, while the shadow of criminal charges began to loom on the horizon. In the city, the judge mobilized her resources, preparing for a battle that would transcend the incident on the road, seeking deeper reform, aware that resistance would be fierce. And on patrol, Corporal Silva and Private Mendez continued their work, but with a new awareness, a new understanding of the true meaning of serving and protecting, knowing that their testimonies would be crucial. The slap on the road had not just been an act of violence. It had been the spark of a chain of events that promised to shake the structures of power and reaffirm that in the end, the law was, indeed, for everyone without exception. As the sergeant plunged into the abyss of his own ruin, Major Almeida, in his cold and calculated inquisition, gave no quarter. Each question was a thrust, each silence from the sergeant, a tacit admission of guilt. The smell of disinfectant in the interrogation room seemed to mingle with the metallic scent of fear emanating from the sergeant, now a pathetic figure, stripped of his former arrogance. Sergeant, why the assault? The forged ticket by itself would already be a very serious abuse of power. But physical violence? What led you to cross that line so brutally and irresponsibly? The major's voice was a scalpel, dissecting the soul of the man before him. The sergeant tried to defend himself at first, with the same empty rhetoric he used on the streets: resistance, disrespect, threat to authority. But the words sounded hollow, even to him. The image of the judge, serene and unyielding, even under his aggression, contradicted every syllable. She had not resisted. She had observed, evaluated, and finally acted with a coldness he would never forget. Major Almeida leaned slightly over the table, his eyes fixed on the sergeant's. "Sergeant, we have witnesses. We have the victim, a federal judge. And we have your record, which, contrary to what you seem to believe, is not immaculate. Do not try to deceive us. That will only worsen your situation, which is already extremely delicate." The mention of his record was a direct hit. He had always known how to manage the small complaints, the isolated incidents that could tarnish his file. A phone call here, a favor there, and everything was swept under the rug. But the scale of this incident was different, federal, a judge. There was no powerful enough godfather to erase this. A wave of icy panic swept over the sergeant. The bravado, the untouchable pose he had cultivated for years, crumbled in seconds, revealing a terrified man. He was a cornered animal, but with no claws to fight. The major's gaze, the clerk's pen scratching on paper, every detail sealed his fate. I lost my head, Major, he finally confessed, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. The truth, raw and stark, was a bitter poison in his mouth. She challenged me. I didn't think. Major Almeida showed no emotion. Didn't think, Sergeant? An officer of your rank, with years of service, didn't think before assaulting a citizen, a federal judge? The repetition of the victim's title was a hammer striking a gong, reverberating the gravity of his crime. This is not a lapse in judgment, Sergeant. It is a failure of character and a grave violation of the oath you made to society and the corporation. The Inquisition stretched for hours, each minute an eternity of humiliation and despair. When Major Almeida finally stood up, the decision was already sealed, the words uttered with an authority that brooked no contradiction. Sergeant, you are formally suspended from your duties, without pay, pending the outcome of the administrative process and the criminal charges that will be brought by the public prosecutor's office. Your weapon and badge will be confiscated immediately. The words fell like stones, crushing what remained of his dignity. Suspended, without pay. Criminal charges. The world he had built on power and intimidation had indeed collapsed. While the sergeant faced the abyss, the judge in her apartment delved into the complexity of the battle that lay ahead. Weariness still weighed on her, but adrenaline and conviction kept her alert. Anna, her assistant, called back, her voice a mix of apprehension and determination. "Doctor, I have the initial findings. The sergeant's disciplinary record is not clean as we suspected. There are records of several warnings for improper conduct and excessive use of force in minor incidents, all filed away or resolved internally without major consequences. It seems he had a godfather in the corporation who always protected him, covering up the incidents." The judge listened intently, her jaw clenched. "Godfather, Anna, that only reinforces what I suspected. It's not an isolated case of an individual. It's a system. I need the names. I want to know who allowed a man with this history to continue acting with impunity, staining the institution's image." "I'm already looking into that, Doctor. As for the public prosecutor's office, Dr. Ricardo Mendez from the criminal prosecutor's office has been assigned to the case. He's already aware of the gravity and was quite receptive to your request for oversight. He understands the need for a firm response." "Excellent. Ask him to meet me tomorrow morning. I want him to see the extent of the problem, not just the isolated incident, and prepare an official statement for the press. I need society to be aware that the federal justice system is acting rigorously. It's not to sensationalize, Anna. It's to inform and reaffirm confidence in institutions, showing that no one is above the law, regardless of their rank or position." She knew that an official statement would be a risky move, that it could be interpreted as an attempt to pressure internal affairs or the public prosecutor's office, but it was a risk she was willing to take. Transparency was her most potent weapon against the darkness of corporatism. She didn't just want to punish a sergeant. She wanted to send a clear message to all who abused power. The law was for everyone, and she, the judge, would be the unwavering voice of that law. In the patrol car, the silence was interrupted only by the patrol radio, which occasionally crackled with a distant incident. Corporal Silva and Private Mendez had completed a few more rounds, but both their minds were far from the dark streets. The weight of what they had witnessed and what was yet to come was palpable. "Corporal," Private Mendez broke the silence, his voice low, almost a whisper. Do you think the sergeant will try something against us for testifying, or the corporation?" Corporal Silva gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "He's not in a position to try anything, Private. He's finished. But the corporation? Yes, there might be pressure. Not directly, perhaps, but glances, comments, the feeling that you betrayed one of your own. That's how it works, unfortunately. But we did the right thing, didn't we? The private's voice was almost childlike in his search for validation, for a moral anchor amidst the chaos. "We did what was necessary," the corporal corrected, his voice firm, imbued with a new conviction. "The right thing isn't always the easiest, Mendez." And the sergeant, he forgot that a long time ago. He confused authority with impunity, and that's a lesson we cannot forget. Never. Alarmed. They knew the news must already be spreading through the battalions. The sergeant who hit the judge would be the story of the week, maybe the month. They would be the soldiers who testified, the ones who didn't stay silent. The responsibility of testifying, of reliving every detail of that night weighed on them. But at the same time, there was a strange sense of clarity, of purpose. The image of the judge, serene and implacable, had planted a seed. They were not just cogs in a system, they were guardians of an ideal. And that ideal at that moment seemed more important than any fear. Corporal Silva pulled the patrol car over to a more isolated spot, turning off the engine for a moment. The silence of the night swallowed the sound of the radio, leaving only the sound of their own thoughts. "Mendez, no matter what happens, no matter the pressure that comes, we will tell the truth. For the judge, yes, but mainly for ourselves, for our honor, for the badge we wear and the oath we took." Private Mendez looked at the corporal, and for the first time since the incident, a flicker of determination replaced the shock and uncertainty in his eyes. "Yes, Corporal, the truth." The night would continue, but for them, the patrol had transformed into a new kind of vigil. The vigil for truth, for justice, and for the redefinition of what it meant to be a police officer. The path would be arduous, full of challenges and perhaps veiled reprisals. But the seed of change had been planted, and they would be a part of it, no matter the cost. Dawn brought not the light of hope, but the heavy shadow of reality for the sergeant. Stripped of his badge, his weapon, his authority, he was now just a man, a potential defendant, confined to the cold cell of a police station that for years he had commanded with an iron fist. The smell of disinfectant, once a symbol of order, now seemed to mock his moral sterility. Every noise outside, every distant voice, was a reminder of a world that moved on without him, a world he had tried to bend to his will and that now bent him in return. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by a visceral fear, a panic that gnawed at his insides. He was no longer the untouchable sergeant. He was the sergeant who got screwed, and the bitter irony of it was a slow poison. While the sergeant struggled in his personal purgatory, the judge, in her apartment, felt the energy of the battle intensify. The meeting with Dr. Ricardo Mendez, the criminal prosecutor, was the next crucial step. She received him in her makeshift office, the piles of documents and legal codes serving as a backdrop to the gravity of the situation. The prosecutor, a man of serious demeanor and keen eyes, listened attentively as the judge laid out not only the incident on the road, but the web of impunity she suspected existed. "Dr. Mendez," she began, her voice calm but charged with authority, "what happened to me was not an isolated event of an unbalanced officer. It was the symptom of a deeper illness, a system that allows individuals with a history of abuse of power to continue operating, protected by a network of favors and silences. The sergeant had a godfather, someone who covered for him. We need to dismantle that network." The prosecutor nodded, his eyes fixed on hers. "Doctor, I understand your concern. We are already analyzing the sergeant's disciplinary record. The information your assistant provided us about the filed warnings is quite revealing. It's clear there was a failure in internal oversight." He paused, his expression grave. "However, the investigation into who protected him could be complex. It's a minefield within the corporation itself. We're already starting to feel the resistance." The judge presented documents, reports, and even some anonymous testimonies that Anna had managed to gather, indicating a pattern of the sergeant's behavior and the complacency of superiors. The prosecutor, impressed by the depth of the research, promised to act with the utmost diligence. Doctor, rest assured that the public prosecutor's office will spare no effort to ensure that justice is done at all levels. The public repercussion is a factor we cannot ignore, and it is in our favor. The judge's official statement to the press continued to reverberate. Headlines exploded not just in major newspapers, but on social media, where outrage and support mingled in a powerful chorus. Federal judge assaulted by military police sergeant in illegal stop. Federal justice demands rigor in investigation of abuse of authority. No one above the law, states judge in official note. Society, tired of constant reports of impunity and abuse, saw a ray of hope in the judge's stance. Within the corporation, the official statement dropped like a bomb. Major Almeida, already under immense pressure from internal affairs and higher echelons, felt the noose tighten. The transparency demanded by the judge forced the corporation to take a stand, not to sweep the incident under the rug. He knew that the internal investigation would have to be relentless, not just for the sergeant, but for anyone implicated in his protection network. The sergeant's godfather, whoever he was now in the crosshairs, and the major knew that institutional loyalty would be tested to its limit. For Corporal Silva and Private Mendez, the news's repercussion was a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief at seeing the judge taking the fight seriously, and apprehension at the internal pressure that was beginning to manifest. The glances in the battalion corridors had changed. Some were respectful, others curious, but many were of a loaded silence, of veiled disapproval. The feeling of betrayal hung in the air. On one of their night patrols, a patrol colleague from another team, Corporal Rocha, stopped Silva and Mendez's vehicle. Rocha's face was tense. "So, Silva, Mendez, I heard about the story. You guys are getting into big trouble, huh? Testifying against one of us. It's not well regarded." Corporal Silva remained calm, but his eyes hardened. "Rocha, we testified to the truth. The sergeant was wrong, and very wrong. It's not a matter of one of us, it's a matter of justice. Justice, eh? Be careful not to get burned. The corporation has its own ways of resolving things. You're new, you don't know how it works. A mistake here, a poorly filled report there, and your careers could go down the drain." Rocha's tone was a warning, a veiled threat. Private Mendez felt a chill, but Corporal Silva was not intimidated. "We know what we did, Rocha, and we're not going back. Our oath is to the law and to society, not to those who abuse power." Rocha shook his head, a cynical smile on his lips. "We'll see. I just hope it's worth it." He started his patrol car, leaving Silva and Mendez with the weight of his words. The silence in Silva and Mendez's patrol car was now denser. The threat, previously just a supposition, had materialized. The pressure would come not only from above, but also from colleagues, from an ingrained culture of corporatism. "Corporal," Mendez whispered, "is he right? Can they harm us?" Silva took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "They can try, Mendez, but they can't break us if we stand firm. The judge is on our side. The public prosecutor's office is on our side. And most importantly, the truth is on our side." He gripped the steering wheel harder. "We're not alone in this. And even if we were, we do what's right. Remember what the judge did. She didn't hesitate, and neither will we." The battle had only just begun, and the first moves of the Godfather, still in the shadows, were beginning to be felt, like subterranean tremors before an earthquake. For the sergeant, the darkness of his cell deepened with the arrival of an unexpected figure, a tall, impeccable lawyer, with a demeanor as cold as the concrete walls. He was not the savior the sergeant had hoped for, but a messenger of an even crueler truth. "Sergeant," the lawyer began, his voice polished but without any empathy, I was sent to ensure you understand the gravity of your situation, and more importantly, to ensure you know what you must not do. There was no mention of bail, of a robust defense, only of damage control. The Godfather was not there to rescue him, but to silence him, to ensure that the weakest links in the chain did not break and reveal the larger structure. The sergeant felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He was a disposable pawn, abandoned to his fate. The arrogance that defined him completely collapsed, replaced by a chilling dread. While the sergeant confronted his new and terrible reality, the judge, in her office, felt the pressure mount. The meeting with Dr. Ricardo Mendez had laid the groundwork, but the counter-offensive would not be long in coming. Ana, her assistant, entered with a tablet, her face tense. "Doctor, the first attacks have already begun. A lesser-known news blog, but with some influence in certain circles, published an article questioning your conduct. It suggests that you are using your position for personal persecution and that the incident was exaggerated." The judge read the article, a bitter smile on her lips. As expected, it's their playbook. Discredit the victim, distort the facts. Who is behind this, Ana? "We're still tracking that, Doctor. But the language and timing are very specific. It seems to be an attempt to undermine the credibility of your official statement and divert focus from the abuse of authority. And there's more, Doctor. We've received information that there's been an internal move to transfer Corporal Silva and Private Mendez to distant units under the justification of administrative reorganization." The news hit the judge like a blow. That's a clear attempt to intimidate witnesses and dismantle the investigation. They won't succeed. Dr. Mendez needs to be informed immediately. We need a judicial measure to prevent any movement of the corporals without the consent of the public prosecutor's office. At the battalion, Corporal Silva and Private Mendez felt the weight of the corporation on their shoulders. The transfer, not yet official, was already a murmur in the corridors, accompanied by looks of disdain and whispers of traitors. What was once a veiled threat now materialized into concrete actions. A superior officer, Lieutenant Colonel Costa, called them into his office. "Corporal Silva, Private Mendez," Lieutenant Colonel said without preamble, "we've received orders to re-evaluate the composition of some teams. You will be reallocated. Corporal Silva, you will go to Rural Patrol, 300 kilometers from here. Private Mendez, to guard an outpost on the state border. The order is immediate." Silva felt rage simmer but maintained his composure. "With all due respect, Lieutenant Colonel, this reorganization seems like a punishment. We merely did our duty and testified to the truth." Lieutenant Colonel Costa slammed his hand on the table. "It's not a punishment. It's an administrative decision, and it's not for you to question. The corporation has its own ways of maintaining order and discipline. You are being transferred. It's either that or face administrative proceedings for insubordination." Mendez, pale, looked at Silva. The threat was real. Their careers were at stake. But Silva, remembering the judge's words, the flame of truth they needed to protect, took a deep breath. "We will not accept this transfer, Lieutenant Colonel, and we will appeal to all legal instances to ensure that justice prevails. We have the federal judge and the public prosecutor's office on our side." Lieutenant Colonel Costa laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You think a judge will protect you from the corporation? Naive. We'll see who has more power in the end." He dismissed them with a wave, certainty of victory on his face, but the judge was already acting. Dr. Mendez, alerted, moved quickly. An injunction was issued, suspending any transfer of the corporals until the conclusion of the investigation. The news reached the battalion like lightning, catching Lieutenant Colonel Costa by surprise and generating a mix of shock and admiration among the officers. The judge was not playing around. Night fell again, and the city seemed to hold its breath. The Godfather, now exposed in his initial maneuvers, felt the noose tighten. The judge in her apartment looked out at the illuminated city. She knew the injunction was just a small victory. The real battle was yet to come. The Godfather was not just an individual, but a system, a web of interests and power that extended far beyond the walls of a battalion. And he would not hesitate to use all his resources to protect himself. The war against impunity had escalated, and each side was ready for the next move. The judge, with truth as her weapon and the law as her shield, was ready to face whatever came, no matter the cost. The seed of change, despite the arid soil, was beginning to take deeper root, and the fierce resistance only strengthened it. The injunction, like a lightning bolt from a clear sky, tore through the false calm that hung over the battalion. Lieutenant Colonel Costa, in his office, felt the blow. The certainty of victory he had boasted moments before dissolved into frustration and fury. The federal judge was not just a voice in the media. She was an active force, capable of dismantling his plans with a simple stamp. The murmurs in the corridors turned into more audible whispers, a mix of astonishment and reluctant respect for the woman who dared to challenge the untouchable. For Silva and Mendez, the news was a breath of fresh air amidst the suffocation. The injunction was not just a legal document, it was tangible proof that they were not alone, that truth, in fact, had powerful allies. The relief, however, came with a new layer of tension. The battle had become public, and the enemy, now wounded, would certainly not retreat without retaliating. In the judge's apartment, victory was celebrated with caution. She knew the injunction was just a skirmish won, not the war. The city, under the nightlights, seemed to hold even deeper secrets. The Godfather, that invisible and omnipresent system, would not be deterred by a setback. He was like a hydra, and each severed head would give way to others, perhaps more cunning, more dangerous. Anna, her assistant, watched her, concern etched on her face. "Doctor, the injunction was quite a blow, but the blog that attacked you is already publishing new articles, less direct, but with the same tone. They're trying to plant doubt about the legitimacy of your actions, suggesting there are hidden interests behind your crusade." The judge nodded, her eyes fixed on the urban landscape. "It's the attrition tactic, Anna. They can't attack us directly on the legal issue now, so they'll try to undermine our credibility, our morale. It's a war of narratives. We need to be prepared for that. And the Godfather won't stop there. He'll try to hit us where we're most vulnerable." And indeed, the Godfather's response was not long in coming, though in a more subtle and insidious way. The next day, the judge's routine began to be invaded by small incidents. A selective leak of personal information to the press, data about an old relationship, a credit card debt already paid off. Trivial details of her private life began to appear on smaller news portals, but with significant reach. Nothing illegal, but enough to create a smokescreen, to divert focus from the main case and paint the picture of a problematic, emotional judge, or one with ulterior motives. Dr. Ricardo Mendez from the public prosecutor's office called, his voice filled with indignation. "They're trying to dismantle your image. These leaks are orchestrated and the intention is clear, to discredit you so the case loses strength. It's a personal attack, and we need to act." The judge, however, remained calm. "I know, Dr. Mendez. It's their tactic, but we won't be diverted. This only proves we're on the right track, that we're hitting a nerve. Stay focused on the sergeant and the protection network. Let me handle this smokescreen." While the judge faced the war of narratives, Silva and Mendez felt the pressure in a different way. The injunction had protected them from transfer, but not from veiled hostility. In the battalion corridors, the silence that surrounded them was heavier than any shout. The glances of colleagues, once merely curious, were now openly hostile. Some averted their faces, others cast looks laden with contempt. The feeling of isolation was suffocating. During a break, while they were having coffee, a group of officers, led by Corporal Rocha, passed by them. Rocha stopped, a forced smile on his lips. "So, the heroes of the corporation. You think you've won, don't you? A little injunction doesn't change reality. You're marked, and the corporation has a long memory." Mendez felt his blood run cold. "We just did what's right, Rocha." Rocha laughed, a harsh sound. "Right for whom? For the judge who wants to make a name for herself? Or for you, who think you'll get promoted by stepping on colleagues? Think carefully. Life in here is long, and one day you might need someone." He walked away, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Silva squeezed his cup, trying to control his anger. "Don't listen to him, Mendez. It's exactly what they want, to intimidate us, to make us doubt. But we can't give in." "But, Corporal, what if he's right? What if we really are marked? How will we work like this? We need the corporation, the trust of our colleagues. The trust that matters is ours, Mendez, and the judges, and the public prosecutor's offices. If we remain upright, they won't be able to truly harm us. The truth is our greatest protection." The judge knew that the pressure on Silva and Mendez was a crucial tactic of the Godfather. If they could isolate them, make them give up, the investigation would lose key witnesses and the case would weaken. She convened a meeting with Dr. Mendez and his team. "We need to ensure the safety and well-being of Corporal Silva and Private Mendez, not just physical, but psychological. They are the backbone of this investigation. I suggest the Public Prosecutor's Office offer a direct channel of communication, support, and that the press be informed about the importance of their testimony, so society sees them as defenders of justice, not as traitors." Dr. Mendez readily agreed. "That's an excellent strategy, Doctor. To turn the attempt at isolation into a spotlight of protection, we will issue a joint official statement highlighting the courage and integrity of the officers who testified, and we will ensure they have all the necessary legal and psychological support." The news of the joint statement praising the bravery of Silva and Mendez reverberated through the battalion. Many officers who previously viewed them with suspicion began to question the traitor narrative. The judge was not just defending her witnesses, she was rewriting the corporation's narrative, showing that loyalty should be to justice, not corruption. The Godfather felt the blow. His strategy of discrediting the judge and isolating the witnesses was being neutralized. He needed a more audacious move, something that would strike at the heart of the investigation, and perhaps the judge herself. The war of nerves escalated, and the next step would be decisive. The judge, in her office, reviewed the case documents, aware that the calm was just preparation for the next storm. The Godfather was cornered, and a cornered animal is always the most dangerous. The seed of change, now watered by courage and truth, was beginning to blossom, but the battle to protect it from being trampled was far from over. The Godfather's shadow seemed to deepen, preparing for a more direct and devastating attack. The Godfather's shadow seemed to deepen, preparing for a more direct and devastating attack. The judge in her office felt this pressure as a change in the atmosphere, a silent premonition. She knew that the calm was just preparation for the next storm. A cornered animal is always the most dangerous, and the Godfather, with his disjointed maneuvers, was wounded but not defeated. The night brought not only the silence of the city, but also a sense of vulnerability. The next day, the judge woke with a strange premonition. Upon opening her apartment door, she found a simple, unmarked envelope slid underneath. Inside, a single photograph, the facade of her old childhood home, with a red circle around a specific window. There was no message, no explicit threat, but the message was clear, chilling, and deeply personal. They knew where she lived, knew her past, and could reach her at her most sensitive points. It was a warning, a reminder that her private life was no longer untouchable and that the line between professional and personal had been brutally erased. The judge felt a shiver run down her spine, but her expression remained unyielding. Calm was her armor. She immediately called Dr. Mendez from the public prosecutor's office and the federal police. "Dr. Mendez, the threat has escalated. It's no longer just a war of narratives. They are sending me personal messages, invading my privacy in a veiled but intimidating way." Her voice was firm, but the gravity of the situation was palpable. "I need immediate protection and an investigation into how they obtained this information." Within hours, the judge's security was reinforced. Federal police agents, discreet but vigilant, began to accompany her. Her apartment was inspected, security cameras installed. The judge's life, already disciplined, became even more controlled, under the constant shadow of surveillance and threat. She knew the Godfather wanted to destabilize her, to make her retreat out of fear. But fear, for her, was just fuel for her determination. Meanwhile, the Godfather's response in the political arena was not long in coming. Rumors began to circulate in the corridors of power in Brasilia. An influential senator, known for his obscure connections and his history of defending questionable interests, made a public statement, questioning the judge's atypical conduct and suggesting that she was exceeding her prerogatives in a minor case. The press, always eager for a scandal, amplified the senator's voice, transforming the criticism into a cloud of suspicion over the judge's integrity. The objective was clear: to pressure the National Council of Justice to open disciplinary proceedings against her, removing her from the case. "Doctor, the attack is multifaceted," explained Anna, her assistant, her voice tense. "The senator is maneuvering behind the scenes. There's a motion for the CNJ to evaluate your conduct. They want to remove you from the case at all costs." The judge listened, her eyes thoughtful. "It's the siege tactic. If they can't beat me on the merits, they'll try to bring me down politically. But I won't give in. My actions are guided by law and justice. Let them investigate me. They will find nothing to discredit me." The news of the motion at the CNJ reached the battalion like a new tremor. The polarization among the officers intensified. Some saw the judge as a hero, an unyielding force against corruption. Others, influenced by the Godfather's narrative and internal pressure, saw her as a threat to the corporation, an outsider who didn't understand the reality of the system. Silva and Mendez felt the weight of this polarization. The joint statement from the public prosecutor's office had given them a shield, but the veiled hostility still existed. Now, with the judge under political attack, the pressure on them also increased. "Corporal, what if they succeed in removing the judge?" Mendez asked, his voice low as they patrolled a quiet area of the city. "What if all this is in vain?" Silva looked at him, determination in his eyes. "Mendez, the judge is not alone, and neither are we. Truth has a force of its own, and even if they try to suppress it, it always finds a way to come to light. We did what is right, and we will continue to do so." The judge, despite the increasing pressure and personal threats, remained focused. She knew the Godfather was playing his last cards, revealing the extent of his power and cruelty. But every attack, every attempt to discredit her, only strengthened her conviction. She was the spearhead of a necessary change, and the resistance she faced was proof that she was hitting the core of the problem. In a meeting with Dr. Mendez and the federal police team, she outlined the next strategy. "They want to remove me? Excellent. We'll use that to our advantage. While the CNJ investigates me, we will intensify the investigation into the Sergeant and the Protection Network. They are distracted with me, thinking they have cornered me. This is the time to tighten the noose on them, to reveal the web of corruption the Godfather has built. We will use the media to expose the intimidation attempt and political interference. We will turn the attempt at silencing into a megaphone for the truth. The war of nerves escalated into an open battle. The judge, with truth as her weapon and the law as her shield, was ready to face whatever came, no matter the cost. The seed of change, despite the arid soil, was beginning to take deeper root, and the fierce resistance only strengthened it. The Godfather had underestimated the strength of a woman determined to seek justice, and now every move he made, however audacious, only exposed more of his fragilities. The next move would be decisive. The judge felt the Godfather's heavy breath on her neck, but instead of backing down, she rose. The photograph of her childhood, the motion in the CNJ, the whispers in the corridors of power, all this was proof that she was on the right track. They were desperate, and desperation for her was a sign of weakness. The strategy outlined with Dr. Mendez and the federal police began to be executed with surgical precision. The press, previously a megaphone for the senator's accusations, now became a stage for the truth. Dr. Mendez, with his impeccable posture and sharp rhetoric, held a press conference. It is unacceptable that in a democratic country, a magistrate fulfilling her duty is targeted by personal intimidation and orchestrated political attacks. The attempt to remove the judge from this case under the pretext of atypical conduct. It is a transparent maneuver to protect a network of corruption that is being uncovered. The public prosecutor's office and the federal police stand in solidarity with the judge and will ensure that justice prevails, regardless of the pressures. The declaration reverberated. The mention of personal intimidation and network of corruption raised an alarm in public opinion. Investigative journalists, spurred by the controversy, began to delve deeper, not only into the accusations against the judge, but also into the senator's connections and the sergeant's history. The Godfather's narrative began to crumble under the weight of exposure. While the judge faced the media and political hurricane with calculated serenity, the investigation team, now with the unrestricted support of the federal police, tightened the noose. Silva and Mendez, invigorated by the protection and public recognition, became key players. They knew the battalion, the shortcuts, the informants. Under the coordination of a federal police detective, they began to map out bribe routes, the sergeant's contacts, the links connecting him to larger figures inside and outside the corporation. Corporal, remember that used parts depot the sergeant always visited? Mendez asked, pointing to a location on the map. He said it was for vehicle maintenance, but I never saw a single part replaced there. Silva nodded, and the owner of the depot, a guy named Zé Galinha, was always very friendly with him. Never paid a fine, even with his truck falling apart. The information, previously an internal murmur, was now a thread to be pulled. The federal police, with search and seizure warrants, raided the depot. They found not only an illegal chop shop scheme, but also parallel accounting that detailed payments for security services, code for bribes, with dates and amounts that coincided with the sergeant's operations. The web of corruption began to materialize into concrete evidence. At the National Council of Justice, the senator's motion, previously seen as a sure strike, met resistance. The media exposure of the intimidation attempt and the joint statement from the public prosecutor's office and the federal police had changed perceptions. The CNJ, aware of the repercussions and the gravity of the interference accusations, decided that the investigation into the judge would be conducted with maximum transparency, but without removing her from the case for now. The political pressure had turned into a spotlight on the accusers themselves. For the Godfather, the situation was catastrophic. His destabilization strategy had failed. The judge not only remained firm, but used his attacks to strengthen her position and accelerate the investigation. The net was closing in. News of Zegalina's depot and the parallel accounting reached his ears like thunder. He knew it was only a matter of time until the evidence began to point directly to him. The Godfather's rage was a contained fury, a volcano about to explode. He had underestimated the judge, her resilience, her intelligence. Now, cornered, with his tentacles being cut one by one, he knew he needed a desperate move. Something that would not only stop the investigation, but eliminate the threat once and for all. The war of nerves had become a battle of life and death. The judge had become a primary target, and the Godfather was ready to play his last and most dangerous card. The shadow that had merely deepened now materialized into an imminent, palpable threat. The next step would be a direct, undisguised attack, aimed at the heart of the resistance. The Godfather's rage was no longer contained. It was a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. His tentacles, once invisible and omnipresent, were being severed one by one. The parallel accounting, Zegalina's depot, the press turning against him, all were testaments to his impending defeat. He had underestimated the judge, and now, cornered, with the smell of prison on his heels, he knew he needed a desperate move, not just to stop her, but to eliminate her, to show everyone that no one defied the Godfather with impunity. In a sharp phone call, his voice was a growl. "Sergeant, the situation is out of control. That woman, she needs a lesson she'll never forget. I want you to intercept her. Show her who runs this city. Make her regret she was ever born." The sergeant on the other end of the line felt a chill. He knew what that meant. An order to humiliate, to intimidate, perhaps even to go further. But loyalty, or fear, was stronger. "Consider it done, boss. She'll learn her lesson." The judge, for her part, sensed the imminent danger. The shadow that had merely deepened now materialized into an imminent, palpable threat. Her federal police agents were always nearby, but she knew the Godfather was cunning. He would look for a loophole, a moment of vulnerability, and she, in her disciplined routine, knew that the road to the courthouse or the way back home were the most exposed points. That morning, the sun had barely risen, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The judge, in her modest car, drove along a less busy road, a shortcut she occasionally used to avoid heavy traffic. Her thoughts were on the case, on the accumulating evidence, on the network she was unraveling. The discretion of her security was her strength, but also her weakness. The federal police agents were in a car right behind, but the distance was calculated not to draw attention. Suddenly, blue and red lights flashed in her rearview mirror. A military police patrol car with the sergeant at the wheel and 2 more officers in pursuit. The judge's heart quickened, but her expression remained unyielding. She pulled over, turned off the engine, and waited. The sergeant approached, his posture exuding arrogance and power. "Vehicle and your personal documents, please," he demanded, his voice carrying a tone that brooked no questions. His eyes swept the interior of the car, searching for something, anything, to justify his stop. The judge handed over the documents, her hand steady, her gaze direct. The sergeant thumbed through the papers, a cynical smile playing on his lips. Bald tires, headlight out, and the registration. Expired. That's going to be a hefty fine, ma'am, and your car will be impounded." The judge knew it was a farce. Her tires were new, the headlights worked perfectly, and the registration was up to date. "Sergeant, my documents are in order, and my car is in perfect condition. There's nothing wrong here." Her calm irritated the sergeant. He expected submission, fear. "Oh, really? Are you calling me a liar? Do you know who you're talking to? I'm sergeant, and I'm in charge here. Don't come at me with your little woman's arrogance." The tension in the air was palpable. The other officers watched, some with discomfort, others with habitual passivity. The sergeant, feeling challenged, moved even closer, invading the judge's personal space. He wanted to intimidate her, to break her. "I'll repeat, Sergeant. My documents are in order. There's no reason for this stop, much less for this charade." The judge's voice was a steel thread, unwavering. Those words were the last straw. The sergeant, blinded by rage and the need to reassert his power, raised his hand. A dry slap echoed in the morning silence, striking the judge's face. The sound reverberated, shocking the other officers. The judge felt the sting, but didn't flinch. Her eyes, previously calm, now gleamed with a chilling determination. Slowly, with a dignity that contrasted brutally with the sergeant's brutality, she reached into the inner pocket of her blazer. The sergeant, still panting, a triumphant smile on his face, watched. He thought he had broken her. But what she pulled from her pocket was not a handkerchief for tears. It was a small leather wallet from which she extracted a golden badge gleaming under the first rays of sun. "Sergeant," she said, her voice low, but with an authority that made the air vibrate, "you have just assaulted a federal judge on duty, and I, at this very moment, am arresting you, caught in the act." The sergeant's smile froze. His eyes widened. The golden badge, the federal judge. The realization hit him with the force of a lightning bolt. His world, built on the sand of corruption and impunity, crumbled in an instant. The other officers, dumbfounded, looked at the badge, then at the sergeant, then at the judge, who now stood up, the red mark of the slap on her face, but with the posture of an unyielding rock. "You," the judge addressed the other officers, her voice firm and clear, "are witnesses. Immediately call the federal police. The sergeant is under arrest for assault, abuse of authority, and attempted obstruction of justice." The federal police patrol car's radio, which had been activated at the moment of the slap, was already transmitting the urgency. In seconds, the federal agents were on the scene, their weapons drawn, their expressions serious. The sergeant, pale, tried to stammer something, but the words died in his throat. He had fallen into his own trap, a victim of his arrogance and the blind order of his godfather. The lesson, after all, would be his, and it would be unforgettable. The war had become an open battle, and the godfather's first general had been captured. The encirclement was complete. The sergeant's triumphant smile collapsed into a grimace of terror. The golden badge, gleaming under the rising sun, was an omen, a sentence. The air he breathed seemed to thin, the ground beneath his feet, once so firm, now quicksand. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat, transforming into an inarticulate grunt. The judge, with the red mark of the slap still visible on her face, but with the posture of an unyielding rock, looked at him, not with anger, but with the calculated coldness of someone who had just moved the final piece in a complex chess game. The other officers, previously mere passive spectators, were now in shock. The sergeant, their leader, the man who personified authority and impunity, stood there, pale, cornered, his eyes wide with pure terror. The federal judge's badge was an unquestionable symbol, a turning point. They knew the hierarchy had just been brutally and irreversibly inverted. In seconds, the federal police agents who had been observing the scene closely emerged from their vehicle. Their weapons drawn, their expressions serious, they approached with lethal efficiency. The radio, which had transmitted the urgency of the moment of the slap, now echoed the confirmation. "Sergeant arrested in flagrante." Repeat, "Sergeant arrested in flagrante." "Sergeant," one of the federal agents, his voice grave and authoritative, addressed the shocked man. "You are under arrest for assault, abuse of authority, and attempted obstruction of justice. Anything you say can and will be used against you." The judge, without raising her voice but with a clarity that cut through the air, instructed the agents, "Gentlemen, please ensure all evidence is collected. The other officers are witnesses. They must be identified and their statements taken immediately. The sergeant was handcuffed, his hands trembling, his body rigid. The humiliation was public, irrevocable. As he was led to the federal police vehicle, his eyes met the judge's. There was no triumph in her gaze, only an unwavering determination. He had tried to break her, but she had pulverized him. His lesson, after all, would be unforgettable. News of the sergeant's arrest reverberated like an earthquake. It reached the Godfather's ears like thunder, a direct blow to the heart of his empire. His fury, previously a wildfire, was now a volcano erupting. He had underestimated the judge, and now, cornered, with his tentacles being cut one by one, he knew he needed a desperate move. Not just to stop her, but to eliminate her, to show everyone that no one defied the Godfather with impunity. In his luxurious office, he smashed the phone against the wall. Incompetence, all of them. I said to teach her a lesson, not to get arrested. His voice was a growl, his eyes bloodshot. He knew that the sergeant under pressure could crack, and then the web of corruption would unravel all the way to him. It was a race against time. The judge, for her part, knew that the sergeant's arrest was just the beginning. The Godfather was a wounded animal, and wounded animals are the most dangerous. She intensified her security, but did not back down. The media exploded with the news. The image of the handcuffed sergeant, alongside the judge, with the slap mark on her face, became the symbol of the fight against corruption. Public opinion, already favorable to the judge, now turned into a clamor for justice. Silva and Mendes, the corporals who had been marginalized by the sergeant, were now heroes. Their testimonies, detailing years of extortion and abuse, were crucial. With the sergeant's arrest, the fear that silenced so many within the corporation began to dissipate. Other officers, previously fearful, began to come forward, providing more pieces of the puzzle. The federal police, with the unrestricted support of the public prosecutor's office, assembled an unprecedented task force. Zegalina's parallel accounting from the depot, once a lead, was now a confession. The names, the dates, the amounts, everything pointed to a complex network that extended far beyond the sergeant, reaching high-ranking political and business figures, all linked to the Godfather. At the National Council of Justice, the senator's motion to remove the judge was summarily rejected. The attempt at intimidation, now exposed in its brutality, had turned against the accusers themselves. The CNJ, under the weight of public opinion and growing evidence, issued a statement of support for the judge, guaranteeing her continued involvement in the case and promising full transparency in the investigation. The senator, once so arrogant, now found himself in a defensive position, his ties to the Godfather being openly questioned. The net was closing in. The Godfather, isolated and desperate, tried one last gambit, a plan to discredit the judge, to plant false evidence, to create a scandal that would bring her down. But the investigation team, anticipating his moves, was already one step ahead. Informants, previously loyal to the Godfather, now saw the ship sinking and sought their own salvation, providing crucial information. In a coordinated operation, the federal police, with search and seizure warrants, raided offices, businesses, and residences linked to the Godfather. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents, recordings, testimonies, the network of corruption, which had seemed unshakable, crumbled under the weight of truth. The Godfather was arrested in his own mansion while attempting to flee. His expression of fury gave way to a blank stare, a recognition of defeat. The war of nerves had become an open battle, and the judge, with her courage and intelligence, had prevailed. The federal judge, with the slap mark still on her face, but now a symbol of her resilience, watched the news. The sergeant, the Godfather, the network of corruption, all would be brought to justice. The fight did not end there, she knew, but an important chapter had been closed. The shadow that had once deepened now dissipated, revealing the light of justice, won with blood, sweat, and unwavering determination. The lesson, after all, had been taught, and it would be unforgettable for everyone.